James Meredith tried again to register at the University of Mississippi, this time at its Jackson office, and this time accompanied by John Doar of the Justice Department and U.S. Marshal James McShane.
Funny thing happened there when we came down that hall that you saw the police coming down this narrow hallway, and I thought that we were going to go through a door at the end of the hall, but as we got, I was first, and then Meredith followed me, and then McShane, and when we got to the end of the hall, the door to which I thought we were going to enter was closed, and we were kind of moved sideways, and a door on the side of the hall opened, and there stood the Honorable Ross Barnett, and the television cameras came down over my shoulder, as I remember it, and before Barnett spoke, at length he looked at me, and then he looked at Meredith, and then he looked at McShane, and he said, "Which one of you is James Meredith?"
Thousands of black people felt the victory and saw James Meredith as an example to follow, a symbol, like the Little Rock Nine, of their own power to move the nation.
Well, obviously he was a courageous man. He had lots of nerve, and he was stubborn, persistent. He knew his own mind, and nobody was going to tell him what he should do or what he should not do. The segregation of blacks throughout the South and many places in the country would not have been solved with military. The strategy was focused on voting. And if ever we've seen a situation where the strategy is judged by the results, just look at what happened last week or on Tuesday. I mean, this is... Nobody in the world can believe that we did it. There hasn't been a country in the history of the world that has ever been able to as effectively solve a race or religious problem like this country has solved the race problem.
Referred to as the Gary Cooper of the Kennedy civil rights team. I know you're humble about all this stuff, but
you know, newspaper people, when they get stuck, they make it up.
Well, here's one of those articles. As bottles, bricks, and stones began to crash around him, he urged the crowd to disperse, reminding them that Medgar Evers wouldn't want them to resort to violence. He asked for help in moving people along, and surprisingly, many listened and complied. I believe that had John Doar not done what he did, many people would have been killed, said Mr. Henderson. There would have been a riot of epic proportions. Goes on. It is impossible to imagine what direction the civil rights movement would have turned that day without Doar. A man trained for a courtroom, not to calm an angry crowd. That wasn't his job. He was only there because he was a friend of Evers and wanted to pay his respect. Doar told Charles Portis of the Los Angeles Times that he took his life in his own hands because, quote, it seemed the only thing to do. Portis went on in his article, said, quote, the Justice Department's John Doar, a 6'2", 41-year-old unflappable Irishman from Wisconsin, is becoming the Marshall Dillon of the troubled South.
And all I can say is, what are you going to do when what am I going to do when I hear this and hear this? It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Tell you about the students really were heroes. That Bob Moses, Diane Nash, Chuck McDew, John Lewis, they were really put themselves in really danger. And what Bob always says is that the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice gave them crawling space in Mississippi in 1961 through 1964. Just gave them crawling space. They had just a little room to move around. And they kept at it, and they kept at this voting, and urging people to go down to register. You know, by 63, conducting mock elections because for governor and for the various federal officials that were up for office.
Monday, June 22nd, 1964, you get a call at your home in Chevy Chase, Maryland. On the line was Mary King, a staff worker in the Atlanta office of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. King told Doar alarming news. On the first day of the Freedom Summer, 3 civil rights workers were missing in East Central Mississippi. King explained that Mickey Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, and James Cheney had set out from Meridian on Sunday morning in a blue station wagon to investigate a church bombing in rural Neshoba County, a known high-risk area. When the 3 failed to return in the afternoon as scheduled, movement workers called local hospitals, jails, and law enforcement offices. The calls yield no word on the whereabouts of the civil rights worker. Could Doar help? King asked. What was your response when you got that call?
Well, we called the Bureau right away and asked them to conduct an investigation. There was no hesitancy about initiating an investigation, and it was that investigation that really changed the attitude and the effectiveness of the FBI. Before that, the FBI was not a very effective law enforcement agency in the South on civil rights matters. But after that tragedy occurred, President Johnson sent Allen Dulles down to Mississippi to make an investigation, and he came back, and among the things he recommended was that Mr. Hoover beef up the FBI capability in Mississippi, and Mr. Hoover did that.
Portions of your closing statement. I wonder if you would read those last 2 paragraphs, because at least for those who have been Jackson fans, you'll see the connection.
This is an important case. It's important to the government. It's important to the defendants, but most important, it's important to the state of Mississippi. What I say here, what the other lawyers say here today, what the court says about the law will be soon forgotten. But what you 12 people do here today will long be remembered. Then I went on to say the defendants will stand before you on this record in the case, and they will beg of you of indulgence. In effect, they will say, as Gloucester said as he stood over the body of his slain king, say I slew him not. The king replied, then say they were not slain, but they are dead. If you find that these men are not guilty of this conspiracy, it would be as true to say that there was no nighttime release from jail by Cecil Price. There were no white knights. There were no young men dead. There was no murder. If you find that these men are not guilty, you will declare the law of Neshoba County to be the law of the state of Mississippi.
The proudest part of my career would be, how would you fill in that blank?
The proudest part was working in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, enforcing federal law with respect to free opportunity for all citizens to vote, free of discrimination.
Conclusion that Professor Neeson used when they honored you. And he concludes, I just think that you deserve a Nobel Peace Prize, John Doar. John Doar, a true American hero. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.